Alright, this is John Cola with okraw.com. So we have another exciting episode for you, and I'm coming at you from my backyard garden here in the springtime. And it's a beautiful day. I was gardening this morning, actually planting peppers out, getting another bed ready to plant peppers. And as you guys can see behind me, got some beautiful leafy greens growing, including some of my famous tree collards and Swiss chard. So the reason for this episode today is because I think a lot when I'm in the garden. I get a lot of different thoughts and beliefs and things that I want to share with you guys. And this is something that I've thought a lot about myself lately, and I don't really see anybody else really teaching this exact concept or practice that, in my opinion, is so critical in this day and age. Whether you want to lose weight, whether you want to heal your body from disease or help assist heal your body from disease, whether you want to have more energy, whether you want to think more clearly, have more athletic performance, it all comes down to one thing, in my opinion, and it's simply this, right? It's the too little, too much rule. And basically, we know what this rule is. If you guys were kids, which you guys were all kids at one point, I hope, unless you're cloned, you've heard of the story Goldilocks and the Three Bears, right? And for those of you guys that don't know Goldilocks and the Three Bears, basically there's three bears that basically invaded a house where Goldilocks lived, and basically each of the bears liked a certain bed, and one bed was too soft, one bed was too hard, and one bed was just right. And so too little or too much, right? That's like too soft or too hard, and just right is where I want you guys to be. I want you guys in your lives to have just the right amount of whatever it may be, including money, right? And I know you're thinking, John, you can't have too much money. Well, I wouldn't exactly know that, but I'm sure there's plenty of stars and famous people that actually have so much money they don't know what to do with, and they commit suicide because they're not happy with their life, because money, having a lot of money, is not totally fulfilling them. So I want to encourage you guys in your lives to have just the right amount of not only money, but also things in your life, and especially having to do, like I'm talking about today, with diet, health, and nutrition, right? And there's a lot of concepts that this too little, too much, or just right can apply to. For example, one of the things that people often overeat in our society is calories, right? People think it's calories in, calories out, and in my opinion, that's not totally exactly true. There's, some differences between the calories you're eating, but the fact of the matter is you can't get too many calories, because then you're gonna hold on to those extra calories, and you can't have too few, because then you're gonna get too skinny. Your body's not gonna have all the energy it needs to do all the required maintenance and tasks, and you're not gonna be optimally healthy. So you need to have just the right amount of calories. So I know you're thinking, John, what's the right amount of calories? So, I have friends like Robert Cheek who knows the right, whatever calorie calculator. You could put in your size, your weight, your activity level, and it'll spit out a number that you need to eat. But basically, we all have what I call a calorie apostat. And what that basically is, when we're hungry, if you eat natural foods, you're gonna eat to meet your caloric goals and needs without knowing and counting every single calorie that you're taking in. Now, of course, if you're not eating natural foods like whole natural plant foods, that system could run amok, because it's not designed to work with oils, extracted sugars, sodium, and all these things. It's used to, work with natural food. So what I do every day simply is I just eat as much as food as I want, provided it's the right food, right? I'm not going to gain weight, and I'm not going to lose weight. If I work harder out in the garden that day, guess what? I'm going to be hungrier, so I'm actually going to eat more food. And if I'm a lazy couch potato day and just online and not moving a whole lot, right, I'm not going to eat actually as much food. And I let nature be my guide. And the other thing I want to let you guys know is that hunger is actually felt in your mouth and throat, not actually in your stomach. And actually, I think I'm feeling hungry again right now. So aside from just the calories, having too much, too little, you could have too much, too little of other things, You could have too much protein or too little protein. You could have too much fat in your diet. You could have too little fat in your diet, like some ultra low fat diets, less than 10%, I don't think are definitely healthy in the long run. You could have too much salt, too much sodium. I'll put a link down below if I remember to a video I did on sodium, and the moral of that video that I'll sum up now is basically you want to make sure you're getting enough sodium in your diet. And I'm not saying you need to add salt to your food. I'm saying you need to have the proper amount of sodium in your diet. That could come from whole natural plant foods. If you're not paying attention, you're not eating the right kind of plant foods, you may actually become deficient, and then in case you might want to add a little bit of good natural salt or sodium to get. But you don't want too much salt, because too much salt is really bad. It's probably just as bad as having too little salt. I'd probably rather have a little bit less salt than too much, but it's best to be just right. And that's what, you know, life and diet is all about. It's about being just right and having just the right amount of nutrients. Everybody always wants to know, John, what's the best food? Oh, kale? That's the best food? The dinosaur kale here? I'm just gonna eat kale every day, right? If you eat kale every day, in my opinion, that's way too much kale, right? As well as kale is one of the best superfoods on the entire planet. It's anti-cancerous, has lots of different trace minerals and vitamins and phytochemicals, lutein and zeaxanthin, all these crazy big fat words that I could pronounce if I wanted to. You know, there's also anti-nutrients in the kale. You know, in a recent case in Northern California, they were eating kale every day because kale's so good and they're making it in smoothies, and they actually have an overdose of a heavy metal that the kale can't absorb. So that was not a good thing. Even though kale in itself is a good thing, too much of it is a bad thing. So I want you guys to get just the right amount of kale. So, and Swiss chard and other greens in your garden, you know, you could be eating too much lettuce. If you have lettuce every day of the year, that's probably too much lettuce, because here, aside from, you know, some of the anti-nutrients in lettuce, which there are actually a few, you could also, when you're eating too much lettuce, you're basically displacing other foods you could be eating, right? You're displacing kale that you could be eating. You're displacing spinach you could be eating when you're eating too much lettuce, for example. So next I want to talk about getting too much or too little fat. I know there's some people out there watching this who are on an LFRV, that stands for low fat raw vegan diet, or even just a low fat vegan diet, right? And I think you know, having the right amount of fat is actually critical to your long-term health, right? Eating too low of fat may not be the best thing, because we do need fats. Our brain is made mostly out of fat, and eating the right types of fat, super critical. But eating way too much fat could also be a bad thing, because basically you're displacing calories or other foods you could be eating when you're eating too much fat, right? And you could be eating something that's better for you than, say, oil. Oil is one of the most overused and overeaten fats, in my opinion. It's actually very high in calories, 120 calories per tablespoon. And you're getting very little nutrition with that. You're getting mostly, you know, just the fat. You know, for example, you know, instead of eating olive oil, I'd rather eat whole olives, which has the oil, but also fiber and other different phytonutrients and phytochemicals, along with this whole plant food. So as to fat, you know, there's some diets out there that may eat, you know, 10% or less of calories from fat, and I think that's too little. And then, you know, most standard Americans eat over 30% of their calories from fat, and I think that can be too much. I like to be in the sweet spot myself, somewhere between, you know, 15 to 25%. I like to hit right around 20, but that being said, I don't really check this every day. I eat maybe like a handful or maybe max 2 of nuts and maybe some other fats, avocado, coconut, to get proper fats in me. You know, when you're eating the proper amounts of fats, not too little, not too much, your body is going to work more optimally. For example, if you eat some fats with your salad meal, or like I just had a juice, I blended in some nut butter with the juice, just a little bit, just a tablespoon, to get higher uptakes of some of the phytonutrients in the vegetables that I juiced, or even in your salads. So it's definitely good to have the proper amount of fat. So another thing I want to talk about is too much or too little protein. And I know there's some people out there that are on plant-based diets, or they're always worried if they're going to get enough protein because there's no protein in plants, or so they've been taught, or so they think. That, in my opinion, is completely false. There's also people out there that say if you eat enough calories, you know, you're going to get enough protein. And, you know, I think that's maybe a little bit more simplistic than things need to be. What I do want to say is that I think people need to get the proper amount of protein, and by eating, you know, plenty of leafy greens, you know, they're some of the highest plant foods in protein. You're probably going to get enough protein, but more importantly than that, like I talked about a little bit earlier, is vary your diet and eat wide varieties of different plant foods. In addition, some other thoughts on proteins, that most Americans get far too much protein in their diet that's displacing things that they could be eating that's healthier. You know, instead of eating animal-based proteins, you know, I think plant-based proteins a lot more sustainable and healthy for you as well as the planet. Let's talk about something else that you could either have too much of or too little of. And in my opinion, that's processed food, right? Processed food, in my opinion, is something that you should work on having too little of, or none at all, actually. And I think that far too many Americans eat way too much processed food. Processed food is anything in a package, bottle, or jar that has more than one ingredient, or even if it has one ingredient and it's in a package, it's probably processed so that it can be put in that package. For example, you know, plants that I'm growing behind me, as they lie in nature, these are unprocessed foods. As I pick it, I take it inside and juice it. That's processing, but I would term that a minimal process, right? When they take foods and they put it into a factory, they add chemicals, they you know, suck nutrients out of it, and they put it in little tablets. That's very, very highly processed foods. So I want to encourage you guys to reduce the processed foods in your life. You know, I eat a very low percentage of processed foods, maybe some kale chips, raw kale chips once in a while, but basically most of the things I purchase at the store are unprocessed foods in their whole raw and natural state. You know, I purchase lots of fruits and vegetables, nuts and seeds, herbs and spices, some seaweeds. Maybe I just got some wild rice the other day, some frozen vegetables, frozen fruits. But you know, that's pretty much it. I'm eating a whole food, plant-based diet, and I think that's also very important to do. Another thing you guys could eat too much or too little of is animal products, right? And I'm going to say that I believe most Americans eat far too many animal products, and that's to their peril. That being said, you know, in my opinion, there can be a healthy amount of animal products, but unfortunately most people far exceed that healthy amount. The healthy range would be, you know, I personally consume 0% of my diet of animal products. I do not believe they're necessary, but I know there's some of you guys that need it, want it, or whatever for any reason. And you know, if you guys want to do that, I'm not here to tell you you got to be vegan or anything. I don't really care. But what I will tell you is that based on my research, the healthy range is from 0, we'll give you that guys that option, to 10% max. A nice area to shoot for would be 5% of your calories from animal products, right? And I think far too many Americans eat far way more percentage of animal products than 5 or 10% max. And it's, once again, to their peril. And once again, each person, we could be conscious and make the decisions that we want to do in our lives, but just know the outcome and know the consequences. And do your research, right? Visit a website like nutritionfacts.org. You can learn a lot, you know, about nutrition from nutritionfacts.org. Another you know, really good person I like to look up to is Dr. Joel Fuhrman. His book, Eat to Live, and actually his new cookbook just came out. It's not all raw. It maybe has a few raw things, but it's a plant-based, high-nutrient cookbook. It's actually available at Costco if you have a Costco membership. It actually has some bonus recipes in there. I think it's his Eat to Live recipe book, and I would actually recommend that if you're not on an all-raw diet. If you are on an all-raw diet, hey, stay tuned. Maybe later this year, hopefully I'll be coming out with my recipe book that me and my girlfriend are putting together. So another thing that you could be eating too much or too little of are your fresh fruits and fresh vegetables. These, in my opinion, are the foods that we should concentrate and the bulk of our diet should be made up of, especially the vegetables that you guys can see behind me. Most Americans do not eat enough quantity of vegetables. I mean, and I'll bet you money on that one, because most Americans, I mean, do most Americans even know what kale or collard greens are, right? But most Americans have a scant amount of some of these most beneficial foods in their life, and these are some of the most protective foods, especially the vegetables and the leafy greens, right? My goal every day is to eat 2 pounds of leafy greens a day, right? And 2 pounds of leafy greens, that's like 200 calories. That's like nothing. And thanks to my garden, you know, it's easy to do that. When I could pull off, you know, a pound of greens and just take it inside and juice it, or I could take some greens like I did yesterday and made like a green smoothie with actually stinging nettles and kale and a whole bunch of mint greens, which are actually high antioxidant foods. And yeah, most people just don't eat enough of the beneficial vegetables, especially leafy greens, as well as their fruits, right? And so I would encourage you guys to concentrate on those items to make it the largest part of your diet. And if you guys want to have some processed foods or whatever, I don't really care, but just eat lots of fruits and vegetables to offset, you know, some of the junk foods you're eating. And, you know, keep in mind also, the plant foods such as the vegetables and the fruits, you know, they're some of the lowest calorie foods because they're also high in water content. And so this is also going to help you achieve your caloric goals as well if you're trying to lose weight, right? And in addition, a lot of the different plant foods have a lot of different phytonutrients and phytochemicals that can assist your body with shedding weight and getting healthier. Another thing you guys could have too much of or too little of, and most people unfortunately have too little of, are some of the beneficial phytochemicals and phytonutrients and antioxidants in these amazing plants that are right behind me. I think that most Americans, once again, if you're not eating your fruits and vegetables, you're not getting these valuable phytonutrients. But even if you are, John, I'm 100% raw vegan, and you know, you could still actually be deficient in the phytonutrients. You know, if you're eating bananas and dates all day and eating a romaine lettuce for dinner, hopefully none of you guys are doing that, right? You're missing out on viable phytonutrients that are in kale that are anti-cancer. If you don't eat garlic or onions, the allium family of plants, you're missing out on other anti-cancer nutrients. If you're not eating mushrooms, you're missing out on some anti-cancer nutrients. And I think by far we should really focus our lives on eating high phytonutrient rich foods. You know, if you have the choice of going to the store and they have purple carrots compared to white carrots or even orange carrots, right? Go buy those purple carrots. They have more phytonutrients than the orange ones or the white ones. That being said, you know, don't always get the purple most of the time, and then sometimes, yeah, get the white ones or the orange ones because those have other different phytonutrients that are just different. And so I think it's really important to also, you know, vary your diet, to have lots of different varieties of foods that you eat, you know, so you're going to get all these valuable phytonutrients. You know, the one thing that I've learned over the last 22 years of being on a plant-based raw food diet since 1995 is that you really want to focus on these phytonutrients, and they're some of the most healing properties in the foods based on my research. So I know you were thinking, John, how could you have too many phytonutrients and phytochemicals and antioxidants? Well, that's pretty easy, right? So if you start supplementing these phytonutrients and phytochemicals, right, take lycopene in a pill or some different vitamins in a pill versus actually eating it from a whole food, actually, they can actually be bad for you because they're not absorbed or taken up, and our body doesn't know how to utilize them when they're not in their whole food plant-based package. You know, I think personally it's pretty hard to overdo any plant food when eaten from whole natural plants. That being said, you can get in a challenge even with juicing, which is something I really like, with certain plants. Every plant has its own natural defenses against animals eating them, and we are an animal, right? Something like katuk or buckwheat sprouts, right? If you juice those in high quantities, that can cause some problems. So once again, you know, I encourage you guys to eat foods in moderation, right? If you're eating katuk this week, you know, hey, take a break from it for the next week, right? And always rotate the foods you're eating. You know, certain phytonutrients in high quantities could also cause problems within us. And so once again, that's why I really recommend and encourage you guys to rotate the foods that you're eating. Too much or too little sugar. John, sugar drives us, man, and what feeds every cell in our body, right? Well, yeah, so there is such a thing as too much sugar, and I'm not really going to get into too much of that, but what I will say is I'm going to clarify that by saying there's something as too much or too little processed sugar. I think personally any amount of processed sugar is not a good amount, but unfortunately most Americans, and even people into plant-based, raw, vegan diets, are eating too much processed sugar products, whether that's a vegan white sugar or a turbinado sugar or you know, honey if you're not vegan, or whether it's agave syrup or, you know, coconut sugar. All these different sweeteners can be a big problem in my opinion, because basically they're tricking our appestat, and they're just giving you basically calories without the nutrients. And okay, yeah, there's some nutrients in honey and some of these things, but a lot of the refined sugars, basically all the nutrients are processed out, and you're just left with this super sweet stuff that lights up your taste buds. The taste is so good that people get hooked on since they were a kid. I mean, we've all done this because since the time we're a baby, you know, we're fed things with refined sugars, and it really messes up our taste buds. So, you know, I would encourage you guys to actually get rid of all the refined sugars, even if it's honey, agave, coconut, sap, you know, whatever it is, and stick to the fruits, right? Fruits have the sugar, but in addition to the sugar, they also have those valuable phytonutrients. They also have the valuable water, right? They also have vitamins and minerals. So it's a more whole food delivery system of these nutrients to you guys. And so the refined sugars, I would encourage you guys to reduce and minimize or eliminate them all. I rarely eat any refined sugars. Maybe if it's in like some kind of packaged kale chips I happen to buy, or maybe if I go to a restaurant, it has some refined sugars or something that's raw that I might eat, but at home I don't generally do that. What I like to use instead is actually just dried dates, or you know, date powder, or it's called date sugar, which is basically just ground up dried dates. I think those are some of the best sweeteners because they're more of a whole food source. So some of the fruits and dried fruits can be definitely a better source of the sugar to fill that sweet tooth, but also get other nutrients when you're eating. So something else you could have too much of or too little of, and I think most Americans would probably get too little of this substance, it's water. We need to stay constantly hydrated at the right moisture level, right? So whether that means you want to drink excess water in your life or drink water every day, or whether that means you want to have, you know, some extra fruit that has a high water content, whether you want to drink some coconut water like I like to do, as well as fresh juices every day to keep you hydrated. You know, more importantly than just getting the water, we need to have the proper hydration level. Super critical, super important. And once again, our body could tell us that, but if you're not super in tune, it might, with your body, it might be good to just have some water. You know, I would personally rather have a little bit excess hydration than too little hydration, because that could cause actually a lot of health challenges. You know, once again, we want to find that sweet spot, right? And this is what it is about health, right? Everybody always wants to know, like, what should I do, John? Should I always eat this or always eat that? What's your favorite recipe, your favorite juice recipe, you know? And they just want to make that every day because it's your favorite. Well, my favorite juice recipe is basically whatever I'm harvesting in my garden, whatever I could find on sale that's organic at the local health food stores, or whatever I could find at the produce terminal that I get a good deal on. And basically I eat what I could find, right, for a good deal. And because I eat what I could find, get the best prices, I kind of rotate what I'm eating, right? Just yesterday, actually, I got 5 pounds of organic cantaloupe for $1. 20 cents a pound for organic cantaloupe. It's insane, some of the prices, man. But, and then, so guess what? You know, I'm eating cantaloupe. I could freeze cantaloupe, make cantaloupe sorbets. You know, I could juice some cantaloupe. And so that's what I'm eating, right? And so next week, cantaloupe's probably not going to be on sale, so I'll probably find something else to eat, right? And so once again, I think I got off the topic. We want to be properly hydrated, and the plant foods that are rich in water content help to hydrate you, along with drinking, you know, other healthy beverages. Now, I do want to say the caveat here is if you're eating cooked foods or dehydrated foods, right? Generally, when you cook food or dehydrate foods, you're removing the water, and those foods can dehydrate you. So in that case, you might want to up your water game, or up your liquids, so that you have the proper hydration level. Something else that you could have too much of or too little of is something like vitamin D. I'm outside in my garden, and earlier today I was getting some sun which my body was making its own vitamin D. And I believe, you know, most people are deficient in vitamin D. When you take a supplement vitamin D, you could actually overdose on some supplemental forms of vitamin D. But if you're just lying out in the sun, aside from getting sunburn, you're probably never going to have too much vitamin D in your blood, because our body will make the proper amount of vitamin D provided we have enough sun. And when our body senses we have enough, it actually is going to really slow down on the production of vitamin D and not make any more. But when we start taking supplements, right, you could easily overdo your vitamin D, and once again, too much of any one thing is not too good. Same thing with iron, right? If you eat a good plant-based diet that is rich in all different kinds of foods, you could have the proper amount of iron. But if you start eating animal products, right, you could have too much iron, and iron is an oxidant, so it can oxidize you, it could prematurely age you, right? So that's why I encourage you guys to get your iron from a variety of plant foods, especially some of them leafy greens. Next, in general, I want to talk about too much or too little of certain different nutrients. Like vitamin D, you could have too much of certain different nutrients in you, too many heavy metals, not enough certain beneficial trace minerals. And how will you know if you have too little or too much? Well, the best way I would recommend is you guys get a blood test. So I'll put, if I remember, a link down below to my good friend Dr. Rick Dina, who does blood testing for raw vegans, and you could find out if you have too much or too little, and then you could get your blood tested, and he could help you and he could work with you to make sure that you have just the right amount, because as I've learned in life and in health, it's always good to have just the right amount, not too much or too little. Another thing I want to talk about is too much or too little cooked foods, right? Is too little cooked foods possible? I suppose it is. So I believe most people are eating far too many cooked foods in their life, and more people should embrace and eat more raw foods. And am I saying that you need to be 100% raw? I'm absolutely not saying that. I'm saying you guys need to eat more fresh fruits and fresh vegetables when they're not raw natural state, because if I just pick some of this dinosaur kale, threw it whole in a pot, cooked it up, and ate it, right, I'd be missing out on some of the very important benefits from the kale, right? When you cook the kale, you kill all its enzymes, and if you eat it raw, you chew it up, it has the enzymes, and when you release the enzymes within the kale, you're basically creating anti-cancer compounds, very powerful ones, isothiocyanates. And if you cook the kale first without any kind of pre-cutting, then you're not going to get the anti-cancer. And so, you know, cooking will degrade the food. You know, in some cases, cooking could be a benefit because it actually could make food that's actually not edible in its raw state actually edible for you. But in general, I think people cook things far too often, and especially the improper way. You know, I think if you do want to cook, the best cooking methods are like maybe pressure cooking or slow cooking or sous vide. Probably some of the better ways, boiling, steaming. Some of the worst ways would be frying, baking at high temperatures, right? And once again, you know, I think one of the concepts I want you guys to think about is too much or too little. If you're eating cooked foods, right, that concentrates foods down, and so you could eat a smaller portion, get a lot more calories, and then you may be offsetting or displacing other healthier foods you could be eating in much higher quantities because you are eating cooked foods, right? And so once again, I'm not going to tell you guys to be a raw foodist, but I'm going to tell you guys that all you guys should be eating plenty good amounts of fresh fruits and fresh vegetables. Now, is there such thing as too little cooked food? I believe there potentially is, right? I believe on a raw food diet, you could actually become deficient in certain nutrients if you're just trying to be 100% raw. You know, maybe in an upcoming episode, I'll make a video on some of the things that I eat that have been heat processed. You know, one of them I'll share right now is the mushroom powders. So mushrooms should not be eaten raw in general, as a general rule. There are a few exceptions, maybe shiitake mushrooms can, but basically mushrooms, to break down the chitin and break down some of the toxins within the mushrooms, mycotoxins and other things, agarotine, they do need to be heat processed, right? So I choose to buy a heat processed mushroom powder that contains 14 different mushrooms, and then I sprinkle a little bit of that in my dressings every night to have some of the benefits of the mushrooms, which actually have anti-cancer properties as well as a whole bunch of other properties within them. In addition, I use a high vitamin D mushroom powder that I mix into my 14 powder mix, and so now I'm getting vitamin D from mushrooms from my food, which is the better way to do it, in my opinion, than simply taking a supplement. So we're coming down the home stretch, and I do want to talk about a few more topics about too much or too little. Let's see, having to do with maybe raw food specifically. So too much or too little dehydrated foods, right? As much as I own a dehydrator, right? Dehydrated foods are not my staple or not a priority in my diet, right? I use dehydrated foods for two main reasons. Number one, to preserve my harvest. You know, so I was making kale chips the other day when I basically up-plowed some of my kale beds because I'm replanting them with peppers, and so I use that to preserve my harvest, and now I could eat that kale later in the season when I may not be growing it in mass quantities. In addition, I like to use my dehydrator to actually condense the food I'm going to be eating to take on a plane. So I like to make kale chips, whether I'm taking them, the fully dried kale chips on the plane, or basically I dehydrate the kale maybe for like 8 hours, and so the dressing and the kale basically kind of like get concentrated, and then I could take that on the plane. So now I don't have a huge salad. I have the salad that would have been huge, but I take out a lot of the water content to have something more concentrated, plus it's not a liquid, so I could get it past the TSA, and then I just drink some water on the plane with it. The other way I like, so that's the two ways I like to preserve my harvest and then actually use it for convenience foods. But as I said before, dehydrated foods could dehydrate you, right? So I don't like to eat the dehydrated foods in mass quantity, so I'd prefer you guys, and what I try to do is eat as little of a dehydrated foods as I possibly can. The next thing I want to talk about is too much or too little fresh made juices, right? I know a lot of you guys only eat whole foods and are on a whole food diet, and John, you're processing your vegetables, you're removing the fiber, and you're taking it out and you're making it worthless as this fresh juice made with your juicer, slow RPM juicer, right? And once again, you know, I want to encourage you guys to do what you can to meet your dietary goals. Some of my dietary goals is I want to have, number one, I want to stay hydrated. Number two, I want to get all these valuable phytonutrients and phytochemicals into me, and juicing allows me to basically concentrate the fruits and vegetables, take away one of the types of fiber, the insoluble fiber, but it keeps the soluble fiber. And in carrots, for example, there's about 48% of soluble fiber, so you're keeping about half the fiber even when you're juicing something like carrots. But basically it allows me to eat higher volumes of the fruits and vegetables. You know, today I juiced 2 small pineapples, 2 cucumbers, 2 beets, and about a dozen purple carrots, and some ginger and some turmeric into a juice that made 55 ounces of juice. I mean, I couldn't probably sit here and eat all those carrots and all the beets and all this kind of stuff. It would not have been fun, so now I could get the benefits of the juice, right? I personally, on a daily basis, if I'm home, I like to drink between 32 to 55 ounces of fresh juice a day, and generally that's my breakfast meal right when I wake up. I usually don't eat anything. I get hydrated with some water, filtered water or coconut water. My first meal of the day, usually around noon, so I'm using the process of intermittent fasting, where I'm fasting literally 12 plus hours of the day. I'm not actually eating anything until I have my first meal, usually after noon, which is the juice, which is something really easy and nice to break my fast and ramp up the phytonutrients. You know, if you're not juicing, then you may not be able to get all the nutrients from your food, in my opinion, especially based on today's age with conventionally raised and even organic food. The quality is just not what it used to be, so that's why I like to juice it, as well as stay hydrated, because I live in a quite arid climate where if you walk outside or you're sleeping at night, you know, you're losing moisture as you're sleeping or as you're just walking outside. I know some of you guys live in the tropics where it's more humid, and that's not necessarily a problem for you guys, but the juicing provides me the hydration as well as the different phytonutrients, and also makes it convenient as well. I know some of you guys work for a living, and you know, by taking a juice you could have literally 5 pounds of carrots and, you know, just 5 cups of juice. So you're taking a big volume of carrots, and now you're getting the majority of the nutrition out of the carrots in a juice that you could take to work or whatever, and I think that's far better than most other things you could be eating. Now, I do think there's such a thing as too much juice, right? Once again, we want to have enough, not too little, not too much, but just have the right amount for you. And what's the right amount for you? That is dependent on you and what you feel good and comfortable with. But I think people that live on juice fast or just only live on juice, I do not believe that's healthy. Maybe if you want to do a juice fast for a week, 2 weeks, maybe 30 days, but I've met people that have lived on juice for like over a year. I lived on juice for a year, man. They were skinny, bony as hell, and you know, in my opinion, that could probably not be a good thing. Now, of course, if you're in some kind of healing mode and you're going through some kind of supervised fasting thing, you know, for an extended period of time, that could be healthy if you're doing it properly. But I think, you know, drinking juice like for years on end is probably not the best thing to do, because, you know, let's face it, right? The fact of the matter is, you are losing some of the fiber, some of the nutrients in the juice, and some of these fiber components, the insoluble fiber, may help to feed our probiotics in our intestines, and they're so beneficial and important for us. Another thing you gotta get too much or too little of are the probiotics, and more importantly, the prebiotics. So we'll talk about prebiotics first. Prebiotics are basically plant foods that contain fiber. You know, some of them could be the stars of the probiotic or prebiotic world. The jicama, yacon, Jerusalem artichokes, even something like garlic, right? But these are the plant foods that really feed our gut flora and our microbiome within us. Even just regular plant foods, you know, fruits and vegetables, they'll all feed your gut flora. So if you're eating enough fruits and vegetables, you're getting enough prebiotics. But I want you guys to focus on eating some of the, you know, some of the ones like jicama and yacon, things like that, because that could be quite beneficial. The other thing I want to talk about is probiotics. Too much or too little, right? Too many probiotics, or you know, it could be, you could get too many and get a disbalance. But I think some people don't get enough probiotics, especially if you're taking a round of antibiotics. So for that reason, I like to eat on a regular basis things like sauerkrauts and kimchi, other fermented vegetables, you know, fermented natto, raw tempeh, you know, fermented raw tempeh when I could get it. and as well as other, powdered supplements. I like the best supplement I like for the probiotics is Dr. Ohhira's Probiotic 10 Plus, but I also take other brands as well because there's all different kinds of species and varieties of probiotics, and I don't know which one's the best, so I just take them all, and guess what? As long as I'm getting live probiotics within me, they're going to colonize my stomach, and they're going to figure out what there wants to be, who wants to be living in there. And here's the thing, the probiotics living within you are based on the food and the diet you're eating. So if you're eating an animal-based product diet, rich in animal products, very little fruits and vegetables, all your different probiotics and your bacteria in your guts are going to be ones that help you digest all the meat products. And I know some of you guys have eaten a high meat product diet, and then you come to eating vegetables and you're like, man, John, I can't digest that stuff. I don't feel good about when I'm eating it. And that's because your microbiome is not in alignment with your new dietary choices that's in your head that you want to do for your health. So the best way to do that, in my opinion, is to transition over slowly instead of just go cold turkey, right? So yes, reduce the amount of animal products you're eating slowly over time and increase the amount of fruits and vegetables. This way your beneficial probiotics will have a chance to react and recolonize, and the ones that are needed to digest the vegetables will start hanging out more, as well as, of course, eating things like sauerkraut and taking other probiotic pills. And so that's what I think is quite important. But yeah, probably having too many probiotics might not be a good thing either. We want to have just the right amount. And I know a lot of people always want to, like, John, what should I do? What should I focus on? Everybody always wants to focus on this or that. But, I want you guys to have, like, one of my mottos and one of my sayings is good, better, best, right? And, there's like different levels of things. You could have too much or too little. You could have just the right amount. So I want you guys to have just the right amount and always do the best you can, and know that you always have different options out there. All right, another thing that I want to talk about on a raw foods diet is too much or too little smoothies and things made in your blender, right? So just recently this year, the first of probably many vacuum blenders came out. I'll put a link down below if I remember that. But basically the Tribest Dynablend vacuum blender is the first vacuum blender on the market. And basically it allows you to suck out the air, the excess oxygen before blending, so you minimize the oxidative damage to the food you're doing in the blender. So I think using a non-vacuum blender and blending things up too much may not be a good thing, because you're losing the phytonutrients. In addition, you're changing the natural fiber by those chopping blades over time when you're blending, and that may not be a good thing. Now, could there be such things as too little blending? I absolutely believe so, right? Maybe you don't have teeth and you need to get a mechanical device to break up some of the particles in there so you get better digestion. So I think that would be probably a good thing. But I think the best is probably get something like a vacuum blender that's going to preserve more of the nutrients. And, don't blend for 3 meals a day, right? Generally, what I like to do every day is I like to juice, I like to eat whole, fresh plant foods, and I like to blend maybe once at night. So I'm getting all the different methods of foods in me. I'm getting some fresh juice in the morning, where I'm taking out some of the, insoluble fiber. I like to have a meal of fresh fruits and vegetables. Today I think I'm going to have blueberries after I make this video. And then at night I like to maybe have a nice big salad where I use a blender to blend some of the ingredients up under vacuum to preserve the nutrients, and then make a nice dressing on the top of my salad. So I think it's really important to be in balance, whatever your diet is, and I want you guys to find your right balance, whatever that is for you. I've shared some of the balances and some of the things that I do in my diet, and hopefully with this video you've learned a few things and you learn more about not too little, not too much, but having things just right. And there's a just right point for most things in our life, and I want you guys to be aware of this and not have too much or too little, but be just right. And how you know what it is, I think after being on a plant-based diet, living in tune with nature, in tune with the earth, if you start listening to yourself, your intuition, yourself and your body will talk to you. Unfortunately, we're not taught how to listen to our bodies, so we're taught to listen to the expert who's supposed to tell us advice. And I want you guys to start thinking for yourself and to listen to yourself inside, because inside yourself we're all really super intelligent beings if we learn how to open up and listen. A lot of the things that I come up with is my body's just telling me, or just comes out of the sky, or whatever. I don't really know. And I want you guys sometimes to go with that, and also, but more importantly, do your research and find out what makes sense, because also sometimes your intuition may not be the most accurate thing in the world either. And I would recommend, you know, especially if you're into doing a plant-based diet, you know, check out the link down below, my friend Dr. Rick Dina, who does blood tests. That way you could find out if you got too much or too little, and you can make proper adjustments to be just right. So if you guys enjoyed this episode, hey, please be sure to give me a thumbs up. I'll be sure to do more videos like this in the future. Since my 22 years on a raw foods diet, you know, I've come up with a lot of different things that I use in my daily life that I'd like to pass on for you guys, so you guys could improve the quality of your life, because that's what it's about for me. You know, I almost lost my life, and that's why I got into this diet. And every day I wake up, I do more research, which sometimes my girlfriend doesn't like because she'd want me to spend time more with her. But I'm researching like these lectins and jackfruit seeds that they're using for cancer, all kinds of crazy stuff. But I'm learning all the time, and I want to share with you guys and make it accessible to you. And more importantly, not just share what I've learned, but share some of the techniques and some of my thought processes that I go through that are even more important than just some of the things I've learned, right? I'll put a link down below to another video I did. Just because it's raw doesn't mean it's healthy, where I actually teach you guys how to determine if something's raw, if it's raw, and if it's healthy or not, without me having to tell you guys. But you guys could come up with your own criteria, as I did in that talk. So some of my most powerful talks, I believe, are not just me spouting out information, but, you know, getting you guys to think and engage more and think for yourselves, because I think, unfortunately, we're not taught that in our society. So I guess I gotta get running. I gotta eat my blueberries, organic blueberries, for lunch. Be sure to click that subscribe button right down below if you're not subscribed already, to be notified of my new and upcoming episodes I'm coming out about every 5 to 7 days. Also be sure to check my past episodes. My past episodes are a wealth of knowledge. Over 450 videos now on this channel dedicated to teach you guys how to eat a plant-based, fruit and vegetable dominated diet the healthiest way possible. Also be sure to share this video with somebody else who's trying to lose weight, gain more energy, or just eat more fresh fruits and vegetables. I think this could probably help them out. So with that, my name is John Kohler with okraw.com. We'll see you next time. And until then, remember, keep eating your fresh fruits and vegetables. They're always the best.